I thought the worst thing about losing my father was the grief. I was wrong. The worst thing was watching my sister Diana stand in his living room 3 days after we buried him, holding a clipboard and telling me, with that thin, practiced smile of hers, that she had already spoken to an estate attorney and that the house, the savings account, and virtually everything else of value now belonged to her. She had a document to prove it, a power of attorney, signed and notarized, dated 14 months earlier, during the stretch of weeks when our father had been bedridden and foggy from chemotherapy. I stood in the hallway where I had spent the better part of 2 years caring for our dying father, and I felt the floor tilt beneath me. She handed me a cardboard box. Inside was a tangle of old cables, a cracked picture frame, a stack of birthday cards I had sent Dad over the years, and a laptop so old it still had a disk drive on the side. "You can take that if you want," she said, nodding at the laptop. "It barely turns on." "I don't even know why he kept it." She said it with the particular dismissiveness of someone discarding a broken umbrella. She did not know, could not have known, that inside that battered machine, buried in a plain text file with a name that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't looking for it, sat a 24-word recovery phrase. And those 24 words were the key to a Bitcoin wallet that my father had quietly been building for nearly a decade, one small purchase at a time, in the years when Bitcoin cost less than $100 a coin. By the time Diana handed me that laptop, like leftover garbage, the wallet contained just over 41 Bitcoin. I didn't know that yet. But Diana's face, 6 weeks later, when she found out, that face I will carry with me for the rest of my life. My father's name was Robert Calloway. He was 67 years old when he died, and he was, without question, the most quietly brilliant person I have ever known. He had worked for 30 years as an electrical engineer at a mid-sized manufacturing company in the kind of unremarkable regional city where people are born, grow up, and disappear into comfortable invisibility. He had not been a flashy man. He drove a 12-year-old sedan that he maintained meticulously himself, replacing the brake pads in the driveway on Saturday mornings while a talk radio program murmured from his phone. He wore the same style of plaid flannel shirt in 4 different colors. He made his own bread on Sundays. He had a workbench in the basement that was organized with the precision of a surgical theater. Every tool in its exact place, every cable coiled and labeled. He was not a man who talked much about money or status or the opinions of neighbors. He was a man who read and thought and watched the world with curious, patient eyes. I grew up in the house on Elm Creek Road, a 2-story, craftsman-style house with a wide front porch and a maple tree in the yard that turned the most extraordinary shade of orange every October. My mother died when I was 11 and Diana was 17, and after that, it had been the 3 of us, Dad, Diana, and me, navigating the particular quietness that loss leaves behind. Diana was already practically an adult when Mum died. She grieved in the way older children often do, by leaving. She went to college 2 states away, built her own life, married Derek Holt at 26, settled in a suburb 40 minutes from home, and came back to Elm Creek Road for Thanksgiving and the occasional birthday. She was not cruel. She was simply absent. And absence, I have come to understand, is its own kind of choice. I was the one who stayed. Not because I was obligated, not because I lacked options, but because I genuinely loved being near my father. After college, I moved back to the city, got a job managing operations for a mid-sized accounting firm, and fell into the rhythm of Sunday dinners with Dad, and occasional weekend afternoons on his porch with coffee, and long, wandering conversations about whatever subject had captured his attention that week. In the years before he got sick, his great preoccupation was technology. Not in the frantic, trend-chasing way of younger people, but in the deep, structural way of someone who had spent a career understanding how systems worked. He'd been fascinated by the internet from its earliest days. He'd been fascinated by encryption, by distributed networks, by the philosophy of decentralized finance. He had read everything he could find about Bitcoin from the very beginning, and in when most people were still treating it as either a punchline or a criminal enterprise, he had quietly started buying small amounts. He never told me how much. He never told Diana either, as far as I know. He was a private man who kept his financial life to himself, the way men of his generation often did, and it simply never came up. What I did know was that his basement workbench included a section dedicated to what he called his digital projects. Old hard drives, USB sticks in labelled Ziploc bags, a Raspberry Pi setup that he used for something he never fully explained, a notebook with columns of handwritten numbers that I had always assumed was some kind of electronics inventory. He had once, in an offhand way, mentioned Bitcoin to me. It was around 2017 or 2018 during one of our Sunday dinners, when the price had spiked into the news cycle and everyone was suddenly an expert. I got in early, he had said, with a small, private smile, and then moved on to asking me about my work. I had not pressed him. I had assumed he meant a token amount, the kind of experimental investment a curious man makes to say he tried something. I had not thought about it again until the night I finally opened that cardboard box. In those last 2 years of his life, after the diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind that doesn't negotiate, I was the one who drove him to chemotherapy every other Thursday. I was the one who learned which anti-nausea medications worked and which made him feel worse, who stocked his refrigerator with the specific brand of ginger ale that didn't turn his stomach, who sat with him through the long, blurred afternoons when the treatment left him too tired to do anything but lie on the couch and watch old nature documentaries. Diana came when she could. She came for the big appointments, the ones with the oncologist, where decisions were being made. And she stayed for a weekend here and there when she could arrange childcare for her 2 kids. I don't want to be unfair to her. Cancer is hard on everyone, and she had a life of her own. But I was the one who was there on a Tuesday night when he couldn't sleep and needed someone to sit with him in the kitchen at 2 a.m. I was the one who changed the sheets when he was too weak to manage it himself. I was the one who held his hand during the last week, when he stopped being able to speak clearly and the hospice nurse began coming every day. Diana was there for the death itself. She drove up that Friday and arrived 6 hours before he passed, and she sat on the other side of the bed from me, and she cried in a way that was real and genuine, and I do not doubt that for a moment. She loved him. I'm certain of that. What I am equally certain of is that she had also, somewhere in the preceding 14 months, decided that love and inheritance were the same thing. That caring, in the abstract sense of caring about someone, entitled her to the concrete things they left behind. And she had taken steps, quiet, careful, legal steps, to make sure that entitlement was formalized before he was gone. I didn't know about the power of attorney until 3 days after the funeral. I should have seen the signs. Looking back now, I can trace the thread of them with perfect clarity, the way you always can after the fact, when hindsight turns a tangle of loose impressions into something that looks inevitable. About 14 months before Dad died, which is to say about a month after his second round of chemo, when he was at his most diminished and foggy, Diana had come to visit for a long weekend. She had brought a notary with her, whom she introduced as a family friend who was doing her a favour. I had been at the grocery store when they arrived. By the time I got back, the notary was gone, and Diana was in the kitchen making tea, and the conversation moved on to other things. And I had not thought to ask what needed notarizing. I had been too tired, probably. 2 years of caregiving produces a specific kind of exhaustion that blurs the edges of your attention, and I had been operating in a permanent state of mild depletion. There were other signs. Diana asking, with what I read at the time as casual curiosity, whether Dad had updated his will recently. Diana suggesting, twice, that the house was getting to be a lot to maintain, and that perhaps Dad had considered simplifying. Diana's husband, Derek, quiet, slope-shouldered Derek, who worked in commercial real estate and had the professional habit of assessing every room he walked into, standing in Dad's kitchen one Thanksgiving and saying, more to himself than to anyone else, "Good bones. This neighborhood is really turned around." I had filed all of it away without connecting the dots. The way you dismiss background noise when you're focused on something more immediate and real. I also noticed in those last few months that Dad seemed occasionally guarded in a way he hadn't been before. Not with me. With Diana. There was one afternoon when she called while I was at his house, and he took the phone into the bedroom and spoke in a low voice for 20 minutes before coming back and changing the subject. When I asked if everything was all right, he looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between reassurance and apology, and said, "Diana worries. You know how she is." I nodded. I let it go. I wish I hadn't. The day after the funeral, Diana asked me to come back to the house. She said we needed to go through Dad's things together and figure out the logistics. I arrived to find her already there, with Derek and a woman I didn't recognize, who turned out to be the estate attorney. The attorney's name was Patricia Caulfield. She was efficient and professionally sympathetic, and she handed me a packet of documents with the kind of practiced gentleness of someone who delivers bad news for a living. The power of attorney Diana had obtained 14 months ago had been used to add her name to the deed of the house as a joint tenant with right of survivorship. Upon Dad's death, the house transferred to Diana automatically, outside of probate. The savings account, which had been jointly held in similar fashion, had already been transferred. "There's a personal property section in your father's original will," Miss Caulfield said, "that specifies his personal effects are to be divided equitably between the two of you. We can work through an inventory if you'd like." She said it in the tone of someone offering a consolation prize. I sat in the living room of the house where I had grown up, the house I had been in and out of almost every week for 2 years while caring for our dying father. And I listened to the sound of Diana moving through the rooms, and I felt something cold and slow move through me, like water seeping under a door. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat very still, holding the packet of documents, and breathed, and tried to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't grief. It wasn't even anger. Not yet. It was something closer to vertigo. The sensation of realizing that the ground you thought you were standing on was not ground at all. Diana came back into the room and sat down across from me. She had the look of someone who had prepared for this conversation and rehearsed her part. "I know this is hard," she said. Her voice was measured and careful, the voice she used in difficult professional situations. "But Dad and I talked about this. He wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family. He worried about..." She paused, choosing her words. Practical matters. Probate, taxes, making sure things were handled efficiently. She folded her hands in her lap. I know you've been very involved here, and I want you to know I appreciate everything you did. But legally, this is how Dad wanted it arranged. I looked at her for a long moment. The living room looked exactly the same as it always had. Dad's reading chair by the window, the stack of library books he'd never finished, the framed photo of the four of us from a summer vacation when Diana and I were young, and our mother was still alive, and the world was still simple and whole. Did he tell you that himself? I asked. In those words? She held my gaze. We had a lot of conversations over the past year. Did he tell you in those words? I repeated. That he wanted you to have the house and the savings, and for me to have a cardboard box. A flush moved across her neck. Derek, standing in the doorway, looked at the floor. Miss Caulfield began writing something in her notebook that was probably nothing, just the physical expression of wanting to be somewhere else. Diana's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice stayed even. What's in the box is still valuable. There are personal effects, photographs, things that have sentimental meaning. And there's the laptop if you want it. His electronics are yours if you want them. She said the word electronics the way you'd say recyclables. I took the box. I took it to my car and I drove to my apartment and I set it on the kitchen table and I sat across from it for a long time without opening it, because opening it felt like accepting something I wasn't ready to accept. Outside my window, the city moved through its ordinary evening. Traffic sounds, someone's television, a dog barking 2 floors up. I sat at my kitchen table in the particular silence of someone who has just lost not one thing, but 2. And I breathed. And I did not open the box. I called my friend Melissa that night. Melissa had known me since college, had known my father, had come to the funeral, had held my arm at the graveside. And she answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting while I told her everything. When I finished, there was a brief silence, and then she said, Anna, that's not okay. Her voice was quiet and steady, the voice of someone choosing their words precisely because they know words matter right now. I mean, it's legal, it sounds like, but it's not okay. You need to talk to someone, a different attorney, not hers. I don't even know what I'd say, I told her. She has a document. She has a notary stamp. What am I going to do? Argue that Dad wasn't in his right mind? He was coherent. He was weakened and sick and on medication, but he could still sign his name. Maybe, Melissa said, but there are attorneys who specialize in exactly this kind of thing. Elder law, undue influence. It's worth at least a conversation. She paused. Don't just accept this, Anna. Don't just take the box and go home and let her have everything. I said I would think about it. After we hung up, I sat with my phone in my hands for a long time. And then I reached across the table and I opened the box. It was exactly what Diana had described. A tangle of charging cables for devices long since retired, a cracked picture frame with a photo of Dad and me from my college graduation, the stack of birthday cards, a coffee mug from a science museum that he'd loved, a small bundle of handwritten notes in his careful engineer's print. And at the bottom, wrapped in a dish towel, the laptop. A Lenovo ThinkPad that had to be at least 10 or 11 years old. The casing scratched and slightly warped at one corner. The power cable coiled around it with a rubber band. I unwrapped it and set it on the table. I don't know why I did what I did next. Call it instinct, call it grief, call it the simple need to do something when sitting still feels unbearable. I plugged in the power cable and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. I waited. Then, after about 30 seconds, the fan made a laboured sound and the screen flickered to life, displaying a pale blue loading screen. It took another full 2 minutes to boot fully, the kind of slow, grinding startup that belongs to a machine held together by habit and optimism. But it booted. The desktop appeared, a plain dark background, a row of icons down the left side. Everything neatly organised in the way that my father organised everything. Neat folders labelled by year and subject in his characteristic shorthand. I felt a wave of something I couldn't name. Recognition, maybe. Or the specific grief of encountering the intimate organisation of someone's private life after they're gone. I looked through the folders without any particular plan. There were engineering documents, decades old. A folder of scanned family photographs. A folder of downloaded articles on topics that told the story of his interests like a timeline. Distributed networks, cryptography, energy systems, neural plasticity, bee colony behavior. He had been a wonderfully wide-ranging reader. I found myself smiling and crying at the same time, scrolling through years of saved articles, feeling the texture of his curiosity like a hand resting on my shoulder. Then I opened a folder labelled simply D. Inside were 2 files. One was a scanned image of what appeared to be an old bank statement from 2009. The other was a plain text file named Garden Notes. TXT. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was what it said it was, gardening notes, the kind of practical memo a careful man makes for himself about soil conditions and planting times. But something made me click on it. Maybe it was the slight incongruity. Dad had never been particularly interested in the garden. That had been my mother's domain. And after she died, he had kept up the basic maintenance without ever developing real enthusiasm for it. So Garden Notes was slightly off. Slightly wrong in the way that makes the back of your mind pay attention before your conscious mind has caught up. The file opened. It was a short document, maybe 20 lines. At the top, in plain text, Dad had written, Anna, if you were reading this, then you found what I left you. I meant for you to have this. It was always yours. The password for the exchange account is in the second note on the piano bench, the one dated my birthday. The recovery phrase for the cold wallet is below. Keep it private. Tell no one until you have spoken to someone you trust absolutely. I love you. Dad. Below that was a list of 24 words. I read the message 3 times. My hands were flat on the table, and I was aware that I had stopped breathing normally, that I was taking these small, shallow sips of air, like someone surfacing from deep water. I read the message a 4th time. He had written my name. He had written it specifically, deliberately. Anna. Not Diana, not my daughters, Anna. And below my name, 24 words separated by spaces, written in my father's careful formatting. I knew enough about Bitcoin, not a great deal, but enough, to understand what a recovery phrase was. I had read articles about it over the years, the way you absorb tangential information about things that touch your life at the margins. 24 words was a BIP 39 seed phrase. It was the master key to a hardware wallet. If there was a hardware wallet connected to this phrase, whoever held those 24 words held everything in it. My hands had started shaking, not violently, just a fine tremor in the fingers, the physical language of shock. I closed the laptop and sat very still in my kitchen and tried to think. The next morning, I called Melissa before I had even made coffee. I told her what I had found. There was a silence on her end that lasted long enough that I said her name to make sure she was still there. "Okay," she said finally. "Don't tell Diana, don't tell anyone. First thing, do you know how to check what's in the wallet?" I said I had a general idea, but that I wanted to find someone who actually knew what they were doing. "I know someone," Melissa said. "My cousin Daniel, he works in fintech. He's done this kind of thing. He's completely trustworthy. Let me call him." Daniel came over that same afternoon. He was a quiet, careful man in his early 30s, who carried a laptop of his own and spoke in the calm, technical manner of someone for whom this was simply a problem to be analysed. He sat at my kitchen table with Dad's laptop and his own equipment and spent about 40 minutes working methodically and carefully. I sat across from him with a cup of coffee I couldn't drink, watching his face for information it wasn't giving me. Finally, he looked up. He set his pen down on the table with a small, deliberate motion. "The phrase is valid," he said. "The wallet exists, and it's accessible." He turned his laptop to show me the screen. "I haven't moved anything, I just looked." He pointed to a number on the screen. 41.3 Bitcoin. The price that day was fluctuating in the low $60,000 range per coin. I stared at the screen. The number sat there, perfectly still, indifferent to what it meant. Daniel said something I didn't hear, because there was a sound in my ears like water rushing. Not a dramatic roar, but that steady, disorienting hiss that happens when the world shifts on its axis, and your body knows before your mind does. I pressed my fingertips to my temples. Daniel was saying something about secure storage, about moving the assets, about a hardware wallet, about taking my time. I nodded. I was nodding at things I wasn't entirely hearing. I was doing the math with the part of my brain that was still operational. 41 Bitcoin at $60,000 each was roughly $2.5 million. My father had left me $2.5 million in a text file named Garden Notes on a laptop my sister had handed me like garbage. It took me 3 days to do anything at all. I went to work. I made meals I didn't taste. I lay in bed at night with the numbers cycling through my head and tried to understand what I was supposed to feel. What I felt, primarily, was grief. A fresh wave of it. Because my father had done something so careful and deliberate and private for me, had planned and kept this secret for years, and I had not known it. And now he was gone, and I could not thank him, or ask him why, or sit with him on his porch and tell him how much it meant. I also felt, underneath the grief, the slow solidification of something else. A resolve that was not hot or frantic, but very, very cold. I called the elder law attorney on day 4. His name was Martin Hartley, and Melissa had found him through a friend. His office was in a brick building downtown, on the 2nd floor, and it smelled of old carpet and fresh coffee, and the particular dry warmth of rooms where important papers are kept. I sat across from him and told him everything. The 2 years of caregiving, the power of attorney Diana had obtained while Dad was on chemotherapy, the transfer of the house and the savings, the box I was handed, the laptop, the file. He listened with his hands folded on his desk, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man who was assembling a picture. Then he asked me several very precise questions. He asked about the dates of the power of attorney. He asked about the circumstances of its signing, who was present, what Dad's condition had been at the time, whether there were medical records I had access to. He asked whether my father had ever, in my presence, said anything that indicated his wishes regarding the distribution of his assets between his two daughters. I thought about that last question for a long time before I answered. I thought about the Sunday dinners. I thought about the afternoons on the porch. I thought about the fact that my father had left me a message, a deliberate, personalized message, inside a file he had named to be overlooked. He had left it for me specifically. He had written my name. I think, I said carefully, that what my father actually intended and what Diana arranged through that power of attorney are two different things. Mr. Hartley nodded slowly. That's what we need to establish, he said. He explained the concept of undue influence, that a power of attorney obtained from an elderly, seriously ill person by a family member who stood to benefit under circumstances that could reasonably be characterized as taking advantage of the person's diminished capacity was challengeable. It would not be simple or fast, but it was worth pursuing. The Bitcoin holdings, he added, are separate. They're not in the estate. Your father addressed them directly and specifically to you. The question of the house and the savings account is the one we'll need to fight. But the digital assets, those appear to be yours clearly. I signed a retainer agreement. Walking out of his office into the grey afternoon, I felt the weight of the folder in my hands. Documents, notes, a checklist of records I needed to gather. And I felt, for the first time in weeks, like I was standing on something solid. I secured the Bitcoin first. Daniel helped me move the assets to a new cold wallet, a hardware device that lived in my apartment in a place only I knew. And the transaction was complete and irreversible within an hour. $2.5 million, give or take the day's fluctuation, sitting in a small black device the size of a thumb drive. I sat with it in my hand for a long time after Daniel left, turning it over and over, feeling its weight. It was nearly nothing. It was everything. I also gathered the medical records. I obtained a complete history of Dad's treatment timeline, every chemotherapy session, every oncologist note, every hospice record. I then cross-referenced these against the notarized date on Diana's power of attorney document. The date was November 14th. 2 days after what had been Dad's most severe reaction to his second round of treatment. A reaction that had landed him briefly in the hospital for rehydration, and that the medical notes described as causing significant cognitive fatigue and disorientation for approximately a week. The power of attorney had been signed 2 days into that window. Mr. Hartley called it very compelling timing. Diana found out about the Bitcoin on a Thursday afternoon, 5 weeks after I had opened the laptop. I don't know exactly how she found out. My best guess is Derek, who worked in financial circles where such things circulate, or possibly something she had found on Dad's old phone. She had kept his phone, along with everything else. However she learned it, she called me at 4:15 while I was still at my desk at work, and her voice had shed its careful professional calm entirely. "Anna?" Her voice was tight and high and thin, like a wire pulled too far. "I need to know what you found on that laptop." I was quiet for a moment. Outside my office window, the afternoon was pale and still, the sky the colour of old paper. I could hear Diana breathing. I could hear, underneath her voice, the particular note of someone who has just realised they may have made a catastrophic mistake. Why? I asked. Don't play games with me. The composed, clipboard-carrying Diana had evaporated entirely. This Diana was raw. This Diana was afraid. Dad had Bitcoin. I knew he had some. I need to know what was on that laptop. You handed me the laptop, I said. My voice was very even. I was proud of how even it was. You called it worthless. Anna. She stopped. Started again. Whatever is on there, it's part of the estate. It belongs to both of us. You can't just... He left me a message, I said, with my name on it. Specifically, my name. He said it was mine. Always mine. The silence that followed was extraordinary in its quality. Full and dense and loaded. The silence of someone having a very fast, private reckoning. I want to talk about this in person, Diana finally said. Her voice had shifted again, going soft and reasonable in the way that I recognized now, the way that I should have recognized much earlier, as her negotiating voice. The voice that came out when she needed something. Can we sit down, just the two of us, and talk? Like adults? Like sisters? I have a lawyer, I said. His name is Martin Hartley. His office is on Commerce Street. Any conversations we need to have can go through him. She called back 4 times that evening. I didn't answer. She sent 3 texts. The last one said, Anna, please. Whatever you think of me, we're still family. Dad would not have wanted this. I read it standing at my kitchen window, looking out at the streetlights coming on in the early dark. I thought about my father in his reading chair. I thought about the Sunday dinners. I thought about the note he had left. I meant for you to have this. It was always yours. I put the phone face down on the counter. Diana and Derek came to Mr. Hartley's office 8 days later. They brought their own attorney, a man named Franklin Reese, who wore an expensive suit and spoke in the particular register of someone who charges by the quarter hour. Diana was dressed carefully, her hair smooth, her expression composed. The clipboard version of herself reassembled. Derek sat beside her, with his hands on his knees, and looked at a point slightly above my head for most of the meeting. The practiced avoidance of a man who is aware he is not entirely comfortable with the role he is playing. I noticed that. I filed it away. Diana's attorney opened by stating that the Bitcoin holdings represented estate assets to which Diana had an equal claim under the laws of intestate succession, regardless of any informal personal note left on the deceased's personal computer. Mr. Hartley countered, calmly and thoroughly, by explaining that the assets had been explicitly and deliberately designated by the deceased, that the note represented clear testamentary intent, and that furthermore, his client was prepared to challenge the validity of the power of attorney obtained in November on the grounds of undue influence and potential cognitive impairment at the time of signing. He set a copy of the relevant medical records on the conference table, with a sound that was quiet but felt loud. Diana's composure fractured. It didn't collapse, she was too practiced for that, but there was a visible tremor in it, a hairline crack running through the carefully maintained surface. She looked at the medical records for a moment, and then looked at me. Anna? Her voice was lower now. Dad loved both of us. I know he did, I said. He also knew you. He knew what you were capable of. I said it without anger. I said it as a simple statement of observable fact, and somehow that was worse than anger. And I watched Diana understand that. Derek shifted in his chair. This was the moment I noticed it. A small, involuntary motion, a kind of flinching, that told me everything I needed to know about the weight he had been carrying. He had been part of this. I had suspected it, but not confirmed it. The way he had assessed the house at Thanksgiving, the way he had disappeared with Diana during that long weekend when the notary came. But I could see, in the way his shoulders moved, and in the way he would not look at his own wife, that whatever he had told himself about what they were doing, he had not been entirely comfortable telling it. It is harder, somehow, to forgive the person who knew it was wrong and did it anyway, than the person who genuinely believed they were right. Diana's attorney made 2 more arguments. Mr. Hartley dismantled both. The meeting ended with an agreement to a formal mediation process, and afterward, I sat in Mr. Hartley's office while the afternoon traffic thickened outside, and he explained, in his measured way, the likely timeline and probable outcomes. The challenge to the power of attorney was the longer fight. The Bitcoin, he believed, was solidly mine. Your sister may pursue it, he said, but her footing is weak. Your father was specific. He named you. He paused. People are rarely that specific by accident. The mediation took 4 months. They were not easy months. Diana called twice more before her attorney presumably advised her to stop. And the second time she called, she was crying in a way that sounded genuine, and probably was genuine. And she said things about our childhood, and about Dad, and about how she hadn't meant to hurt me, and how she'd just been trying to protect the family. I listened to all of it. I did not hang up, because I am my father's daughter, and he raised me to listen, even when it was hard. But I also did not soften, because I had spent 2 years by a hospital bed, and at a chemotherapy ward, and in a hospice room. And somewhere between the November power of attorney and the day Diana handed me a cardboard box with a snapped charging cable and a picture frame with a crack through it, the softness had been used up. What came out in mediation was worse than what I had initially known. It came out that Diana had, in fact, been advised by Derek about the potential value of the Bitcoin holdings approximately 2 years before Dad died, during a period when Derek's professional contacts in financial technology had been discussing cryptocurrency extensively. It came out that Diana had, on at least 2 occasions, asked Dad directly whether he still held Bitcoin, and had received non-committal answers. It came out, and this was the detail that sat in my chest like a stone for a long time after, that she had known the laptop might contain something valuable. She had opened it herself, briefly, in the days after the funeral, and had not been able to get past the login screen. She had dismissed it because she couldn't access it, not because she believed it was empty. You knew, I said to her in the final mediation session. Not raising my voice, not performing it, just saying it as a fact. You knew there was something on that laptop, and you gave it to me because you thought I wouldn't be able to find it either. She did not answer. She looked at her hands. The mediation resulted in a settlement. The Bitcoin I kept entirely, because the evidence of my father's intent was clear and well documented, and because Diana's own attorney apparently advised her that pursuing it further would be costly and unlikely to succeed. The house was the harder negotiation. The medical records established a credible case of undue influence, and Diana's attorney knew it. And after 3 sessions of back and forth, we reached an agreement in which Diana would either buy out my share at fair market value, 40% of the appraised value, which was determined to be the equitable split given the circumstances, or sell the house and divide the proceeds accordingly. She did not have $460,000 in cash. The house sold 8 weeks later. I was in Mr. Hartley's office when the transfer confirmed. He slid a document across the desk for my signature and then shook my hand across the desk with a brief, firm grip and said, "Your father thought ahead." It was the most efficient summary of everything, and I nodded and didn't trust my voice enough to say anything in return. Derek called me once after it was all over. Not Diana, Derek. He called from what sounded like his car, probably on his way somewhere, and his voice had the quality of a man saying something he should have said months ago and knows it. "I just wanted to," he started, and then stopped, and then started again. "I want you to know that I told her at the beginning that this wasn't the right way to handle it, that it would end badly." He paused. "I should have said it louder." I thought about this for a moment. I thought about what it must have cost him to make this call, and I thought about what it definitely had not cost him while it was happening. "You should have," I agreed. And then I said goodbye. And I didn't wish him ill because that wasn't who I wanted to be, but I didn't offer him absolution either, because some things are not mine to forgive. I have not spoken to Diana since the settlement. I don't know what will happen there. I don't know if there is a version of our relationship that survives this. And I have stopped trying to know. Some losses are clean, and some are complicated. And what I lost with Diana belongs in the second category. Not a single dramatic break, but years of accumulated distance. And then this, which did not create the distance so much as reveal that it was already there, had always been there. Had just been dressed up in birthday dinners and holiday visits, and the performative togetherness of people who share blood, but not understanding. What I gained is harder to name, because it is diffuse and layered. There is the financial security, the Bitcoin, now a different number than it was in October, because the market does what it does, but still extraordinary, still enough to change the entire shape of my life. There is the share from the house, which sits in a high-yield account and earns interest. There is the cold wallet in my desk drawer, that small black device, which I check sometimes, not because I'm worried about it, but because it reminds me of my father's long, patient, quiet faith in something he believed in before most of the world took it seriously. And there is this. A year after I took the cardboard box home and sat at my kitchen table, unable to open it, I bought my own house. Not a big house, not a showpiece. A 2-story craftsman-style house with a wide front porch and a maple tree in the yard. It was not an accident, the maple tree. I saw the listing, and I saw the tree, and I called the realtor within the hour. The house needed work, which was fine. I've spent the better part of the past 8 months working on it on weekends, learning things, basic electrical work, how to replace a porch board, how to refinish floors. I'm not good at all of it yet, but I have a workbench in the basement, small and still largely empty, and I've been slowly populating it in the way that feels right, one labelled drawer at a time. On the morning I moved in, I brought a coffee maker and a single mug, the coffee mug from the Science Museum that had been in the cardboard box, and I stood on the porch in October and looked at the maple tree, which was exactly the colour orange it was supposed to be, the specific colour that means autumn in every language. And I held the warm mug with both hands and thought about my father, reading his articles at his kitchen table, quietly building something that no one else could see yet, patient and certain and entirely himself. I thought about the 24 words hidden inside a file named Garden Notes. I thought about the word he'd written at the top of that file. Anna. He had seen what was coming. He had known his older daughter in the particular way But a careful man who loves you and watches you knows someone, completely and without illusion. And he had made arrangements accordingly. He had not left me the house because he could not. He had left me something that Diana could not take from me, because she did not know it existed. And then he had made sure I would find it. And he had made sure it had my name on it. It was the most elegant, quiet act of love and foresight I have ever encountered. And I am the daughter who understood that he was capable of exactly this. And I think that is why he left it to me. The maple tree has lost most of its leaves now, as November settles in. The porch smells of cold wood and coming winter, and faintly of the coffee I spilled last Sunday and wiped up before it dried. I have Dad's framed photograph on the mantel, the one with the cracked frame that I had fixed with a steady hand and a bit of careful work. In it, he is looking at the camera with that expression he had, slightly amused, slightly somewhere else, entirely himself. I talk to it sometimes when the house is quiet. I tell him about the porch, about the floors I'm refinishing, about the maple tree. I tell him that Daniel says the market is doing interesting things, and that Mr. Hartley sends his regards. I tell him I am learning to do the things he taught me by example, to be patient, to be methodical, to trust in things that other people haven't noticed yet. I tell him I found his garden notes, and that the garden is doing just fine.